Tuesday night on the Las Vegas Strip, November 2016. Neon burns through desert haze, painting everything gold and red. Taxis unload tourists chasing jackpots. Music shakes the sidewalks. 3 blocks off the Strip, behind the Belmont Casino, the noise dies. 2 armored vans idle under harsh floodlights. Diesel fumes mixing with cigarette smoke. Inside, sealed bags stacked on steel pallets. $22 million in weekend cash. Grainy security footage. Timestamp flicker. Wide-angle distortion. A man in gray uniform stepping into frame. He signs the manifest, checks the seals, loads the crates with slow precision. Thomas Rayburn, 54, 20 years on the job. No record, no drama, no attention. At 3:14 a.m., he shuts the doors, waves once to the guard, and drives into the neon night. By dawn, the van is found empty. The money and Thomas Rayburn are gone. No masks, no guns, no violence. Just 20 years of patience in 15 minutes of perfection. Before we dive into the story of the invisible man who walked away with a fortune, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and hit that hype button to share this with other true crime fans. This is the story of the driver who knew too much. Thomas Edwin Rayburn was born in Henderson, Nevada in 1962, back when Henderson was still a small town outside Las Vegas, not the sprawling suburb it would become. Henderson in those days was a place where everybody knew everybody, where the casino lights from the Strip were visible but distant, like a promise of something bigger that never quite reached you. His father, Edwin Rayburn Sr., was a Vietnam veteran who worked maintenance at the Flamingo in the 70s. Edwin Sr. had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a mechanic, came home with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares he never talked about, and spent the rest of his life fixing air conditioning units and slot machines in casino back rooms. His mother, Dorothy, was a cocktail waitress at the Stardust, one of those women who could carry 8 drinks on a tray while navigating a crowded casino floor in high heels and a costume that weighed 15 pounds. She worked that job for 12 years until her feet couldn't take it anymore, and she took a position as a cashier at a grocery store. They raised Thomas and his younger sister, Rebecca, in a modest ranch house on Van Wagenen Street, a small 3-bedroom place with a gravel yard, a chain-link fence, and a carport where Edwin Sr. kept his tools meticulously organized. The house was always clean but never quite comfortable, filled with the quiet tension of parents who worked too much and dreamed too little. Tommy was quiet, said his sister, Rebecca Solis, in an interview 5 years after the heist. She sat in her living room in Henderson, photographs of Thomas spread across the coffee table, school pictures, family snapshots, images of a thin boy who rarely smiled. Even as a kid, he just watched people, watched how things worked. While other kids were playing baseball or riding bikes, Tommy would sit on the porch and watch the neighbors. He'd notice things, like which houses got the newspaper delivered first, or which cars left for work at exactly the same time every day. Dad used to say Tommy could figure out how any machine worked just by staring at it long enough. He had this way of seeing patterns that other people missed. Rebecca remembered one incident from their childhood that stuck with her. Thomas was 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, when their mother came home from work crying. She'd been shortchanged on her tips. Another waitress had taken credit for Rebecca's tables while she was on break, and the floor manager had sided with the other woman because she'd been there longer. Tommy didn't say anything, Rebecca recalled. He just watched Mom cry. But 3 weeks later, that other waitress got fired for stealing from the cash register. Nobody ever proved Tommy had anything to do with it. But I always wondered. He had this way of noticing things that could be used later. Thomas graduated from basic high school in 1980 with unremarkable grades, mostly C's and B's, a few A's in mathematics and shop class. His yearbook photo shows a thin teenager with dark hair and serious eyes, no clubs listed, no activities mentioned. In the space where students wrote personal quotes, Thomas had left it blank. He didn't have many friends, said David Ortega, who sat next to Thomas in algebra class. He wasn't bullied or anything. He was just, not there. You know how some people have presence? Tommy had absence. You could forget he was in the room even when he was sitting right next to you. After graduation, Thomas attended community college for 2 semesters studying business administration. He earned decent grades but showed no passion for the material. He lived at home, worked part-time at a warehouse, and seemed to be drifting through life without direction or purpose. Then in March 1982, his father died of lung cancer, the result of 4 decades of smoking and breathing in asbestos from old casino ventilation systems. Thomas dropped out of school. After Dad died, Tommy just shut down, Rebecca said. He'd always been quiet, but after that he became a ghost. He moved into a cheap apartment, worked whatever jobs he could find, barely spoke to anyone. I'd call him every week and he'd answer in one-word sentences. How are you? Fine. What are you doing? Working. It was like talking to a recording. He worked a series of forgettable jobs over the next 5 years. Warehouse clerk at a furniture distributor where he loaded trucks and took inventory. Delivery driver for a medical supply company where he dropped packages at doctors' offices across the valley. Overnight security guard at a strip mall where he walked the empty parking lot with a flashlight and clipboard. Nothing stuck. Nothing excited him. He moved through these jobs like a sleepwalker, collecting paychecks and leaving no impression on anyone. I supervised him at the medical supply warehouse, said Carlos Mendez, now retired and living in Arizona. Tommy worked here for maybe 18 months around 85, 86. Good worker, always on time, never complained, did exactly what you told him to do. But I couldn't tell you a single personal thing about the guy. I don't know if he liked sports or movies, if he had hobbies, what he did on weekends. I tried talking to him once, asked if he wanted to grab a beer after work with some of the other drivers. He just said, well, no thanks, and walked away. After a while, I stopped trying to make conversation. Some people just don't want to be known, you know. In 1987, at age 25, Thomas met Linda Kowalski at a Denny's restaurant on Boulder Highway. She was a waitress working the late shift, tired eyes, dyed blonde hair, a professional smile that rarely reached beyond customer service. He was a regular customer who came in 3 times a week after his security guard shifts, always sitting in the same booth by the window, always ordering the same thing: coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, no butter. He came in for 6 months before he said more than, "Thank you," Linda recalled in her interview with investigators years later. She was 52 when they found her, living in Phoenix with her second husband, a cheerful contractor named Mike who seemed like everything Thomas wasn't, and 2 teenage children from that marriage. One night it was slow, maybe 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted, and I just sat down at his booth without asking. Started talking about how my feet hurt, how the overnight shift was killing me, just venting. He didn't say much, but he listened. Really listened. You know how most men hear you but don't listen? Thomas listened, and when he did talk, he was thoughtful, careful with his words, like every sentence was something he'd considered before letting it out. I thought it was mysterious. I thought he had depth. They dated for 4 months. Quiet dinners at chain restaurants like Applebee's and Olive Garden. Movies where they didn't have to talk much. Long drives through the desert at sunset where the silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Linda thought Thomas was just shy, that eventually he'd open up and reveal himself, that there was some inner life he was protecting that she'd eventually be allowed to see. They married in a small ceremony at a chapel on Boulder Highway in September 1987. 20 people attended, mostly Linda's family and friends, co-workers from Denny's, a couple of neighbors. Thomas's side was nearly empty, just Rebecca and her new husband Frank, and one guy from the security company. Thomas barely knew but felt obligated to invite so his side wouldn't look completely abandoned. The wedding was strange, said Linda's sister, Marie Kowalski, who still lives in Las Vegas and works as a school administrator. Thomas said his vows like he was reading from a phone book. No emotion, no joy, just words. I remember looking at Linda and seeing her smile, but there was something in her eyes, like she was trying to convince herself everything was fine. I pulled her aside at the reception and asked if she was sure about this. She said Thomas was just nervous, that he showed love differently than other people. She wanted so badly to believe that. The marriage lasted 3 years and 8 months. He wasn't mean or cruel or anything like that, Linda said, her voice soft with the sadness of old disappointments that still ache sometimes. He never yelled, never got angry, never raised his hand. He just wasn't there. Even when he was sitting right next to you on the couch watching TV, he was somewhere else entirely. I'd ask him what he was thinking about and he'd say nothing. But I could see his eyes moving, like he was solving some equation I couldn't see. We'd have entire evenings where he wouldn't say more than 10 words. We'd go to bed, wake up, eat breakfast, and he'd communicate entirely in nods and one-word answers. Linda tried everything. She suggested couples counseling. He said they didn't need it. She asked if he was unhappy. He said no. She asked if he loved her. He said yes, but in the same tone he'd used to confirm the time. The worst part, Linda said, was realizing it wasn't about me. At first I thought I'd done something wrong, that I wasn't interesting enough or pretty enough or something. But then I realized he was like this with everyone. His sister, his coworkers, the guy at the gas station. He lived inside himself, and there was no door to let anyone else in. He wasn't keeping me out specifically. He kept everyone out. They divorced in May 1991. No kids, no drama, no big fight or betrayal. They just sat in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon, signed papers that divided their minimal assets. Linda kept the apartment and the car. Thomas kept his truck and his tools and went their separate ways. Linda cried. Thomas didn't. I saw him one more time, about 5 years after the divorce, Linda said. I was at a Vaughn's grocery store, and he was in the checkout line 3 people behind me. We made eye contact. He nodded. I nodded back. And that was it. Like we'd been strangers all along. Like those 4 years had never happened. In 1996, at age 34, Thomas applied for a position at Silverline Secure Transport, one of the largest armored car companies serving Las Vegas casinos. The job required a clean record, a commercial driver's license, and the ability to pass a psychological evaluation designed to screen out potential thieves. Thomas passed everything. He was perfect on paper, said Gerald Chen, Silverline's former hiring manager. No criminal history, stable work record, no debt problems, no substance abuse flags. Quiet guy, but that's not unusual in this industry. Armored car drivers aren't supposed to be chatty. They're supposed to be reliable. Thomas started on local routes, small casinos, check cashing stores, ATM refills. Within 2 years, he'd worked his way up to the premium routes, the big strip casinos where millions moved every night. He was punctual to the minute, said Marcus Webb, a former co-worker who rode with Thomas on split shifts. I worked with him for 3 years, and I don't think he was ever late. Not once. He'd show up 15 minutes early, check the vehicle, review the route, and be ready to roll exactly on time. Webb remembered Thomas as someone who barely spoke during their shifts together. We'd be in the van for 6, 7 hours, and he'd say maybe 20 words total. Just drove, made the pickups, did the paperwork. I tried making conversation, sports, weather, whatever, and he'd answer with 1 or 2 words. After a while, I stopped trying. But Thomas wasn't antisocial. He wasn't rude. He simply existed in a state of watchful silence. He noticed everything, Webb said. One time, we're at the Luxor loading dock, and Thomas says, "Camera 3 just went offline." I looked up and couldn't see anything different. But sure enough, one of the cameras had stopped moving. He could just tell from the pattern. Over 2 decades, Thomas became what his supervisors called a ghost with keys. Someone so reliable, so invisible, that the system simply accepted his presence without question. He lived alone in a rented duplex in Henderson, 15 minutes from the Silverline Depot. His neighbors barely knew his name. He didn't gamble, despite living in Las Vegas. Didn't drink at the bars where other drivers unwound after shifts. Didn't date, didn't travel, didn't spend money on anything except basic necessities and his truck payment. I lived next door for 7 years, said Patricia Moreno, his former neighbor. I'd see him maybe once a week. He'd nod, say evening, and go inside. That was it. I didn't even know what he did for work until the FBI showed up asking questions. Thomas's bank account showed a pattern of minimal activity, paycheck deposits every 2 weeks, automatic withdrawals for rent and utilities, occasional small purchases at grocery stores and gas stations. He had no credit card debt, no investments, no suspicious transactions. He was, by every measurable standard, nobody. and that invisibility would become his greatest weapon. It started in March 2015 when Silverline Secure Transport was acquired by Secure Logistics International, a multinational corporation based in Chicago. The acquisition was announced in a company-wide email. Exciting news! Silverline is joining the SLI family. Together we'll create new opportunities for growth and efficiency. What the email didn't say, cost-cutting was coming. Within 3 months, the changes began. Overtime was eliminated. Health insurance premiums increased. The pension plan, which Thomas had been paying into for 19 years, was restructured with reduced benefits. They basically gutted everything, Webb recalled. We went from making decent money with benefits to scraping by. A lot of the senior drivers quit, but Thomas, he just kept showing up. Thomas's paycheck shrank by nearly 30%. His responsibilities, however, expanded. Routes were consolidated. Driver teams were reduced to solo shifts. The company installed GPS tracking and automated manifest systems to improve efficiency, which really meant monitoring drivers more closely while paying them less. At a staff meeting in August 2015, Thomas asked a question. What happens to our pension contributions if we leave before retirement? The regional manager, a man named Derek Paulson, who'd flown in from Chicago, barely looked up from his tablet. You'd receive a prorated amount based on vested years. It's all in the employee handbook. And if the company folds? Paulson finally looked at Thomas. Silverline isn't going anywhere. Next question. But Thomas had done the math. With the restructured pension and reduced pay, he was looking at maybe $40,000 after 20 years of service, 20 years of moving other people's fortunes, and he'd retire with barely enough to cover a used car. That's when something changed in him, Webb said. Not obviously. He didn't complain or get angry, but I'd catch him watching the money during transfers, really watching it, like he was calculating something. Thomas began paying attention to details he'd previously ignored. He noticed that the Belmont Casino used manual signature verification instead of the newer digital scanners, a cost-saving measure since manual systems didn't require software licensing fees. He noticed that security guards at loading docks changed shifts at 3:00 a.m., creating a 15-minute window where the incoming guard was being briefed and the outgoing guard was already checked out mentally. He noticed that during system maintenance windows, which happened monthly between 2:45 and 3:00 a.m., the Belmont's manifest logging went offline while servers rebooted. He noticed that surveillance camera footage in loading areas was stored for only 30 days before being overwritten, and that the cameras themselves used older networking equipment with 2 to 3 second delays in live feeds. Nobody was paying attention, said FBI Special Agent Rebecca Ortiz, who later led the investigation. The casinos and Silverline both operated on institutional trust. Thomas had 20 years of clean service. He was bonded and insured. He'd been background checked multiple times. The system assumed he was safe because he'd always been safe. But Thomas had realized something crucial. The system's security wasn't designed to stop insiders. It was designed to stop outsiders. And he was the ultimate insider. In October 2015, Thomas drove to a public storage facility in North Las Vegas and rented a unit under his own name. No fake IDs, no elaborate cover story. Just a simple month-to-month rental for $120. I thought he was probably storing old furniture or car parts, said the facility manager, Luis Dominguez. Lots of people rent units for that. He paid in cash, never caused problems, came and went at odd hours. But that's normal for this place. Inside the unit, Thomas began assembling supplies. Not weapons, not lock-picking tools, not anything obviously criminal. He collected discarded shipping materials from his legitimate work, damaged pallets, torn shipping labels, cracked plastic security seals, all things that would normally be thrown away but could be repaired or replicated. He purchased an industrial label printer from a liquidation sale, the same model Silverline used. He bought reams of security paper stock that matched company manifests. He acquired handheld barcode scanners from eBay, the discontinued models that Silverline had phased out, but some smaller casinos still accepted. Everything was legal to own. Nothing required special permits. That's what made it brilliant, Agent Ortiz said. He wasn't building a criminal enterprise. He was creating a perfect duplicate of a legitimate operation. Anyone could have bought the same equipment, but only someone with Thomas's experience would know exactly which equipment mattered. For months, Thomas studied the patterns. He logged every detail in a small notebook he kept in his work locker. Camera angles, guard rotation times, manifest serial number sequences, GPS signal dead zones, radio frequency delays. "We found that notebook later," Ortiz said. 50 pages of handwritten observations, dates, times, camera positions. He'd mapped out the entire strip's armored car infrastructure like a military tactician studying enemy territory. His coworkers noticed nothing unusual. Looking back, maybe he was quieter than normal, Webb said. But Thomas was always quiet, so who could tell? By October 2016, Thomas had everything he needed: knowledge, equipment, and a window of opportunity that opened once a month during system maintenance. He just needed one more thing: a vehicle. On October 8, 2016, Thomas attended a public auction in Henderson, where the city was selling surplus vehicles, office equipment, and various items seized in bankruptcies and foreclosures. The auction was held in a dusty lot behind a municipal warehouse. About 40 people wandered among the vehicles, mostly small business owners looking for cheap trucks, contractors hunting for equipment deals, and a few curious locals just browsing. The air smelled like motor oil and desert heat. Among the lots, a 2011 Ford E450 armored van, formerly used by a now-defunct security company called Desert Shield Transport. The van was white with faded blue lettering, reinforced doors, and bulletproof windows. It had been seized in a bankruptcy proceeding 18 months earlier and sat in the city impound lot collecting dust and bird droppings ever since. The auctioneer, a weathered man in his 60s with a microphone and a tired voice, started the bidding at $12,000. Silence. "Come on, folks, this is a solid vehicle. Armored, custom interior. Runs great." Nothing. "All right, how about 10,000? Anyone? 10,000 for a vehicle that cost 75 new?" More silence. Most people weren't in the market for an armored van. 8,000? Do I hear 8,000? Thomas raised his bidding paddle. Number 47. "I got 8,000 from paddle 47. Anyone else? 8,000 going once." The auctioneer scanned the crowd hopefully. "Going twice." No one else bid. "Sold to paddle 47 for $8,500. "I processed the paperwork that afternoon," said Carla Jensen, the auction clerk who handled the transaction. She was a friendly woman in her 40s who'd worked municipal auctions for 15 years and had seen thousands of transactions. He paid with a cashier's check, already made out, like he knew exactly what he was going to buy. Filled out all the registration forms perfectly, no mistakes, no questions. Very efficient. I asked him what he planned to use an armored van for, just making conversation. He said he worked in security and wanted it for a training project. Made sense to me. Signed over the title, and he drove it off the lot that afternoon around 3 p.m. Thomas registered the van in his own name at the DMV. Again, no fake identity, no elaborate cover story, no attempt to hide the purchase. He filled out Form DMV 14, paid the registration fee with a money order, and received license plates under his real name and address. He drove the van directly to his storage unit in North Las Vegas, a facility called Secure Store, one of those places with hundreds of identical orange doors in long rows, surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras that mostly worked. He backed the van into the unit and closed the rolling door. For the next 2 weeks, Thomas transformed the vehicle. Using automotive paint purchased from an O'Reilly Auto Parts store, he bought 6 cans of Arctic White, 3 cans of Navy Blue, and 2 cans of Sunrise Gold, paying cash and signing no receipts. He matched the van's exterior to Silverline's corporate colors. He worked methodically, applying primer first, then base coats, then clear protective coating. The work took 3 days, done entirely inside the storage unit with the door closed, a respirator mask protecting his lungs from fumes. He replicated the company logo using vinyl decals printed at a commercial sign shop called Signworks on Charleston Boulevard. He walked in on a Wednesday afternoon with a high-quality photograph he'd taken of a real Silverline van and told the owner, a chatty man named Rick Paulson, who ran the shop with his wife, that he needed the decals for a security training demonstration his company was conducting. He had the exact dimensions, the exact Pantone color codes, everything, Rick recalled when investigators interviewed him. Most customers come in with vague ideas. This guy had specs like an engineer. He showed me the photo and said he needed 2 sets of decals, company logo, vehicle number, everything. I quoted him $400. He paid cash, picked them up 3 days later, never complained about the price. Professional guy. I had no reason to think anything was weird about it. Thomas applied the decals himself, using a heat gun and squeegee to eliminate air bubbles, aligning everything perfectly to match the real Silverline fleet vehicles he'd been driving for 20 years. He installed magnetic vehicle identification numbers on the doors, numbers that matched Silverline's fleet registry, numbers he'd memorized from seeing hundreds of vans cycle through the depot over 2 decades. He purchased these magnetic numbers from an online industrial supplier that sold them to fleet management companies. He added radio antennas purchased from an electronics surplus store, the kind that looked functional but weren't connected to anything. Same with the GPS housings on the roof, empty shells that gave the appearance of tracking equipment without containing any actual technology. From 20 feet away, in anything less than bright daylight, the van was indistinguishable from a real Silverline vehicle. It was a prop, Agent Ortiz explained later, like a movie set piece. It didn't need to function. It just needed to look right for about 15 minutes in dim lighting. And that's exactly what Thomas gave it. Perfect surface details with nothing beneath them. Throughout October, Thomas refined every aspect of his plan. He drove the route from the Belmont Casino to the abandoned industrial lot multiple times, always at night, always at the same time he planned to execute the heist. 15 miles through North Las Vegas, through areas zoned for warehouses and manufacturing that were largely empty after midnight. He timed the drive. 22 minutes at 55 miles per hour, 26 minutes at the speed limit. He mapped every security camera along the route using publicly available information and personal observation. There were 3 traffic cameras on the first 5 miles, but none on the final 10-mile stretch through the industrial zone. He verified that the abandoned lot was owned by a dissolved LLC called Western Properties Group, which had declared bankruptcy in 2014. The property had been tied up in litigation for 2 years and sat untouched, confirmed by Thomas, leaving small markers, a rock painted orange, a stick arranged in a specific pattern, and checking weekly to see if they'd been disturbed. They never were. He calculated fuel consumption. A fully loaded armored van carrying 400 pounds of cash would get approximately 9 miles per gallon. He'd need at least 2 gallons for the full route, plus reserve. He filled both vehicles' tanks completely 3 days before the planned heist. He studied weather patterns for mid-November in Las Vegas. Average temperature 58 degrees at 3 a.m., less than 5% chance of rain, no wind advisories forecast. And critically, he studied the calendar and cross-referenced it with system maintenance schedules he'd memorized from years of working with the casino network. November 15, 2016 was perfect. It was a Tuesday night following a busy weekend. The Belmont would have maximum cash reserves from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday operations. It coincided with the casino's monthly system maintenance window when manifest logging temporarily went offline. And it fell exactly 48 days after Thomas's last vacation request, making the timing natural and unsuspicious. Everything aligned like the gears of a watch. On November 10th, Thomas made 3 stops. First, he withdrew $1,500 from his bank account, nearly his entire savings, and closed the account. Second, he stopped by the DMV and renewed his driver's license, which was set to expire in December. If I'm starting a new life, he apparently thought, I'll need valid ID. Third, he visited his sister Rebecca for the first time in 8 months. He just showed up at my house on a Thursday afternoon, Rebecca recalled, her voice breaking. Said he wanted to see how I was doing, how the kids were. We had coffee. He helped my son with his math homework. Then he hugged me, which was weird because Tommy never hugged anyone, and said, "Take care of yourself, Becca." Did he seem different? An investigator asked her later. He seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted. I thought maybe he'd met someone or gotten a promotion. I never imagined. She couldn't finish the sentence. On the evening of November 14th, Thomas showed up for his regular shift at Silverline. He went through the standard pre-drive checklist, signed out vehicle number 47, and completed his assigned routes without incident. His supervisor, David Krakowski, saw him at the end of the shift. "Everything good tonight, Tom?" "All good. See you tomorrow?" "Absolutely." It was the last normal conversation anyone would have with Thomas Rayburn. November 15th, 2016, 1:30 a.m. Thomas clocked in at the Silverline Depot exactly on time, as he had for 20 years. He completed the vehicle inspection on truck 47, signed the logs, and loaded his equipment: clipboard, seal verification scanner, handheld radio. The night dispatcher, a woman named Gloria Mendez who'd worked alongside Thomas for years, handed him the manifest. "Big one tonight," she said. "Belmont's got weekend earnings going out. 22 million. Thomas glanced at the paperwork. "Routine pickup?" "Yeah, standard protocol. But do me a favor. Call when you clear the drop-off. System's scheduled for maintenance tonight, and I want verbal confirmation." "Will do." He walked to the truck. The parking lot was mostly empty, just 3 vans waiting for morning shifts. Security lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter circled the strip, probably tourist sightseers looking at the lights. Thomas started the engine and pulled out at 1:47 a.m., exactly on schedule. The drive to the Belmont took 12 minutes. He arrived at the loading dock at 1:59 a.m. and pressed the intercom button. "Silverline, scheduled pickup." The gate rolled open. Thomas backed the van into position at the loading dock and killed the engine. He grabbed his clipboard and stepped out, stretching briefly before approaching the security window. Inside, a guard named Oscar Ruiz sat behind bulletproof glass, watching 3 monitors. "Hey, Tommy. Late night?" "Always is." Thomas slid his ID badge through the verification slot. Ruiz scanned it. The system beeped green. "You're clear. They're bringing the crates up now." 2 casino employees in blue jumpsuits appeared pushing a heavy cart loaded with 4 sealed aluminum crates. Each crate bore the Belmont's official seal, a numbered tag, and a barcode. "Big haul tonight," one of them said. "So I heard." Thomas checked the seal numbers against his manifest, verifying each one carefully. Then he scanned the barcodes with his handheld device. Everything matched. "Sign here." Thomas handed over the digital pad. The casino employee signed. Thomas signed. The transaction was logged in both systems, Casino and Silverline, with identical timestamps. Using a hydraulic cart, Thomas loaded the 4 crates into his van. Each one weighed approximately 200 pounds. $22 million in mixed bills, already counted and verified by casino accountants earlier that evening. He secured the crates with straps, double-checked the locks on the rear doors, and returned to the security window. "All set," he told Ruiz. "Drive safe." Thomas climbed into the driver's seat. He started the engine, waited for the security gate to open, and pulled out into the night. The time was 2:47 a.m. According to the route plan, he should have proceeded north on Industrial Road, merged onto I-15 South, and arrived at the Federal Reserve substation by 3:30 a.m. Instead, Thomas made a right turn onto Polaris Avenue. He drove at exactly the speed limit, not too fast to attract attention, not too slow to seem suspicious. His hands were steady on the wheel. His breathing was calm. At 2:54 a.m., he turned onto an access road leading to an industrial area scheduled for demolition. The buildings were empty, the streetlights broken, no traffic cameras, no businesses, no witnesses. At 2:58 a.m., Thomas pulled into an abandoned lot behind a shuttered warehouse. His duplicate van sat waiting, parked exactly where he'd left it 3 hours earlier. Thomas worked quickly but methodically. He backed the Silverline van next to his duplicate. Using a portable hydraulic lift he'd purchased from a hardware store, he transferred all 4 crates from the official vehicle to his replica. The entire process took 8 minutes. He stripped off his Silverline uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it on the driver's seat of the official van. He clipped his employee badge to the steering wheel. From his pocket, he pulled a handwritten note on plain white paper. "You can't lose what was never yours." He placed the note on top of the uniform. Then Thomas locked the official van, pocketed the keys, and climbed into his duplicate vehicle, now loaded with $22 million. At 3:11 a.m., he drove out of the lot heading west, away from Las Vegas, into the dark expanse of the Mojave Desert. Behind him, the abandoned Silverline van sat silent under broken streetlights, its cargo bay empty, its doors locked, waiting to be discovered. At 7:12 a.m. on November 16th, the Federal Reserve substation in Henderson called Silverline Dispatch. Gloria Mendez answered on the second ring. Coffee cup in hand, already tired from an overnight shift that should have been ending. Silverline Secure Transport. This is Federal Reserve Substation 12. We're showing a scheduled delivery from the Belmont Casino, logged for 3:30 a.m. Vehicle number 47. It never arrived. Gloria's stomach dropped. Say that again? Your driver, Thomas Rayburn, was supposed to deliver $22 million in currency at 3:30 a.m. It's now 7:12, and we haven't received the transfer. We've been trying to reach him for an hour. Gloria pulled up the tracking system on her computer, fingers trembling slightly as she typed. Vehicle 47 showed its last GPS ping at 3:06 a.m. near Industrial Road and Cheyenne Avenue. Then nothing. The system displayed a red warning. Signal lost. Check device. She tried Thomas's radio. Static. She tried his cell phone. Straight to voicemail. You've reached Thomas Rayburn. Leave a message. This is Gloria from Dispatch, Tom. Call me immediately. It's urgent. She hung up and stared at the screen, hoping it was just a technical glitch, a dead battery, some simple explanation. But after 25 years in the security transport business, she knew better. She contacted her supervisor, Jim Bellows, who was at home in Summerlin, about to eat breakfast with his wife. Jim, we have a problem. Tom Rayburn missed a delivery. $22 million from the Belmont. GPS is dead. Can't reach him. There was a long silence. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Call the Belmont and verify the pickup happened. And Jim, start praying this is just a breakdown. 15 minutes later, the phone calls turned the situation from concerning to catastrophic. At 7:45 a.m., the Belmont security director, a former Metro Police Sergeant named Raymond Cole, confirmed that the cash transfer had been completed according to protocol. Our system shows Thomas Rayburn, employee ID 4782, signed out 4 aluminum crates containing $22.2 million at 2:47 a.m. Our camera footage confirms he loaded the crates himself. Everything looked normal. Did he say anything unusual? Bellows asked. Nothing, just his usual routine. Oscar, the guard on duty, said Thomas seemed like Thomas. Quiet, professional, efficient. He was out of here by 2:50. By 8:00 a.m., Silverline's GPS tracking team had pinpointed the last known location of Vehicle 47, an industrial area 15 miles west of the Strip, near Losay Road and Tropical Parkway, an area zoned for warehouses, most of them empty or abandoned. By 8:15 a.m., Jim Bellows and a Silverline operations manager named Peter Kowalski were driving toward the location in a company truck, both of them hoping against hope that they'd find Thomas with a dead vehicle and a good explanation. At 8:23 a.m., they found the van. It was parked behind an abandoned warehouse, a gray concrete building with boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls. The building had a faded sign reading Southwest Distribution Solutions, a company that had gone bankrupt in 2013. The Silverline van sat in the empty parking lot, perfectly centered between faded parking lines. Engine cold to the touch. The doors were locked. Bellows peered through the window. Oh no, oh God, no. Inside on the driver's seat, Thomas's gray Silverline uniform was folded neatly, creases sharp like he'd prepared it for inspection. His employee badge, the one he'd worn every day for 20 years, was clipped to the steering wheel, the photo facing forward, Thomas's serious expression staring out at nothing. On top of the uniform lay a handwritten note on plain white paper, written in Thomas's precise block letters, "You can't lose what was never yours." Kowalski called 911. "We need police at Losay and Tropical, behind the old Southwest Distribution Building. We have an abandoned armored car. The cargo is missing." At 8:31 a.m., Las Vegas Metro Police Officer Dennis Harkness arrived on scene. Lights flashing, but no siren. There was no emergency anymore, just a crime scene. "When I saw that scene," Officer Harkness later testified at a grand jury hearing, "I knew immediately this wasn't a random robbery or a carjacking. The vehicle was locked, not broken into. The uniform was folded like somebody leaving their desk at the end of the day. The note was philosophical, not threatening. This was planned. This was calculated. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wanted everyone to know they did it intentionally. Harkness called for backup and secured the scene. Within 15 minutes, the parking lot was taped off. Crime scene technicians were photographing everything, and detectives were swarming the vehicle. The cargo bay was empty. Not ransacked, not forced open, just empty, as if the money had never been there. Within 90 minutes, the FBI was notified. By noon, Special Agent Rebecca Ortiz and a full task force of 12 investigators had taken over the case, setting up a command center at the Las Vegas FBI field office on Las Vegas Boulevard. "We treat armored car thefts as priority one," Ortiz explained during a press conference later that day, standing behind a podium with the FBI seal, cameras flashing. $22 million is significant even by Las Vegas standards, and the clean execution suggested either a sophisticated criminal organization or an insider with extensive knowledge. Based on preliminary evidence, we were looking at the latter. The investigation moved quickly and methodically, like a military operation. Agents interviewed everyone at Silverline. They pulled Thomas's personnel file, employment history, financial records. They interviewed neighbors, coworkers, his ex-wife, his sister. They found no red flags, no sudden debt, no suspicious contacts, no criminal associates. "He was a ghost," Ortiz said. 20 years of absolute reliability, then he just vanishes with $22 million. They reviewed surveillance footage from the Belmont loading dock. It showed Thomas conducting the pickup exactly according to protocol. No suspicious behavior. No accomplices visible. They checked traffic cameras along every possible route. They found footage of Vehicle 47 heading west on Polaris Avenue at 2:49 a.m., the last confirmed sighting. "And then he disappeared," Ortiz said, "like he drove into a different dimension." Investigators discovered the storage unit Thomas had rented. Inside, they found scraps of materials used to create duplicate manifests and seals, along with the notebook containing his observations of casino security systems. "That notebook told us everything," Ortiz said. "He'd been planning this for over a year. He documented every vulnerability, every gap in coverage, every timing window. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This was a systematic dismantling of the system he'd spent 2 decades helping to build." They located the auction records showing Thomas had purchased a surplus armored van. They tracked down the sign shop that printed the vehicle decals. They found receipts for paint, equipment, tools. "Everything was legal," Ortiz noted. "He didn't steal the van. He didn't counterfeit the decals. He purchased everything legitimately. The only crime was the actual theft itself." But where was Thomas? The FBI issued a federal warrant for his arrest. His photograph appeared on news broadcasts across the Southwest. A tip line was established. Days passed. No credible sightings, no financial activity, no communications. "It's like he evaporated," Ortiz said. 3 weeks after the heist, a break emerged. A gas station attendant in Kanab, Utah, a small town near the Arizona border, called the FBI tip line. "I think I saw that guy from the news, the casino driver." Agent Ortiz drove to Kanab personally. She reviewed the security footage. At 6:47 a.m. on November 16th, roughly 14 hours after the heist, a man matching Thomas's description had purchased coffee, a road atlas, and a prepaid phone card. He paid cash. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses despite the early hour. The footage quality was poor, a single grainy camera positioned behind the register. "Is that him?" the attendant asked. Ortiz studied the screen. The man's build matched. The age seemed right, but the image was inconclusive. "Can't say for certain," she admitted. "He asked for directions," the attendant added, "to the interstate, heading east." East could mean anywhere: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, or beyond. Investigators canvassed the area. They checked every hotel, every diner, every gas station within 100 miles. No one else remembered seeing Thomas. "He was smart," Ortiz said. "Small towns, cash transactions, no paper trail. If you stay off the grid and don't attract attention, you can disappear surprisingly easily." Meanwhile, the investigation into the stolen money continued. Federal prosecutors built a case for theft, interstate transportation of stolen funds, and fraud, but they couldn't charge anyone without finding them first. Silverline Secure Transport collapsed within 6 months. The company couldn't survive the reputation damage, said Gerald Chen, the former hiring manager. Casinos lost confidence in our security protocols. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. Clients terminated their contracts. By April 2017, we were filing for bankruptcy. The Belmont Casino sued Silverline for negligence. Silverline's insurance company sued the casino for inadequate security protocols. The legal battles dragged on for years, ultimately settling out of court for undisclosed amounts. But the money, the $22 million, was never recovered. Rebecca Solis, Thomas's sister, was interviewed by the FBI 7 times. They thought I was hiding him, she said. They searched my house, my phone records, my bank accounts. They even questioned my kids at school. But I didn't know anything. I still don't. She paused, her eyes red. The brother I knew wouldn't do this. But then again, I'm not sure I ever really knew him at all. Thomas's ex-wife, Linda, spoke to reporters once. People ask me if I saw this coming. I didn't. But I'm also not surprised. Thomas was always watching, always calculating. I used to joke that he saw the world like a chessboard, always thinking 10 moves ahead. I guess I was right. As months turned into years, the case grew cold. Sightings were reported across the country. Texas, Florida, even Canada. But none were confirmed. We follow up on every tip, Ortiz said in a 2019 interview. But the reality is Thomas Rayburn could be anywhere. He could have changed his appearance, assumed a new identity, or simply retired to some quiet place where nobody asked questions. The FBI's working theory is that Thomas either buried the money in the desert, planning to retrieve it slowly over years, or that he successfully transported it across the border to Mexico, where he could live comfortably without extradition concerns. $22 million is heavy, Ortiz noted, over 300 pounds of cash. You can't just carry that in a suitcase. He either stashed it somewhere or had a very specific plan for moving it discreetly. To this day, the case remains open. Thomas Rayburn is listed on the FBI's most wanted list, though he's slipped from the top tier to the middle ranks as newer, more violent crimes take priority. We haven't forgotten, Ortiz said. Eventually, someone will see him. Eventually, he'll make a mistake. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he really did execute the perfect heist. The impact of Thomas Rayburn's theft rippled through Las Vegas for years. Every casino on the Strip upgraded their cash handling protocols. Manual signature systems were replaced with biometric scanners. GPS tracking became mandatory with real-time monitoring. Armored car companies implemented 2-person minimum teams for all high-value transfers. The industry learned an expensive lesson, said casino security consultant Martin Delgado. Insider threats are the most dangerous because they know exactly where the vulnerabilities are. Thomas exploited institutional trust that had existed for decades. The Nevada Gaming Control Board issued new regulations requiring blockchain-verified manifest logging, making it virtually impossible to duplicate or alter transfer records. Thomas succeeded because the system relied on paper trails and trust, Delgado explained. Now everything is digital, encrypted, and verified in real time. What he did couldn't happen today. But the question that haunts investigators isn't just how Thomas did it. It's why he waited so long. He could have stolen money at any point over 20 years, Agent Ortiz reflected. He had access, opportunity, and knowledge. Why did he wait until 2016? Was it the pension cuts, the company restructuring, or had he been planning it all along, waiting for the perfect moment? Rebecca Solis has her own theory. I think Tommy finally got tired of being invisible, she said. His whole life, he was the guy nobody noticed, the quiet driver, the reliable employee, the forgettable neighbor. Maybe after 54 years of being nobody, he wanted to prove he could do something nobody would ever forget. She visits her brother's old duplex sometimes. It's been rented to new tenants, but she parks outside and remembers him living there. I hope he's okay wherever he is, she said softly. I hope he found whatever he was looking for. But I also hope he understands what he took from all of us. Not the money, but the person we thought we knew.